Hi everyone, and welcome back to the SBC Player Protection Digital Day. My name's Steve Hoare. I'm the editor of SBC's Player Protection Hub. And we're here for a webinar on the strengthening of crucial relationship between operators and regulators. Should be a good conversation. I'm here with Anton Kazabowski, who's the founder and managing director of SBC Advisory Partners, Peter Marcus, who is the CEO of Savvy Hill Marketing, and Simon Westbury, who is the strategic advisor of OneXBet. We're here primarily on the back of a report that SBC Media did with OneXBet called the International Player Safety Index. We released part one of this research at the end of the summer at the SBC Summit in Lisbon, which was focusing on Western Europe. We're going to go around the globe with it and cover other areas. But this first part of the report, focused on Western Europe as arguably the most developed regulated markets. And it had some fascinating points to make, particularly on this relationship between operators and regulators. Anton, could you perhaps summarize some of the main findings to kick us off?
Sure. Firstly, I'm delighted to be here with you all today. Thanks for having me. I'd also concur with you that I actually think the report's really well researched and useful, and I'd certainly encourage anyone who hasn't perused it already to take the time to have a read. In terms of the key findings, I see, 4 or 5. The others may see more, so please chime in at the end if you think I haven't covered something that's important. Firstly, what found out for me is that while specific regulation around player protection has obviously advanced positively, in recent times, this has led to a much greater volume and tightening of the rules, which are not always clear and consistent. And also, across different regulatory jurisdictions, the landscape is still pretty mixed. So the report itself conveys that there is no single gold standard for player protection regulations, and the overriding impression it gives is that every market has its own set of rules, culture, and expectations. In that respect, therefore, while there's been a lot of progress, it's still clear that there's a long way to go in terms of challenges to overcome, creating a more coordinated and holistic approach, especially across different jurisdictions. I think the main point. The second point that I saw was, as a result of this lack of clarity and consistency across the different jurisdictions, it remains a major challenge for operators to competently apply and communicate their protection strategies at scale. We're therefore still in a relatively early period of development, testing and learning. I think that came out in the report, and best practice is still very much a work in progress. The third point that I took from the report was that many operators are still calling for clearer guidance and greater alignment between regulators, suppliers and operators. At times, operators appear to be struggling with applying regulatory standards and could really benefit from more specific situational and practical guidance from the regulators themselves. And I think that's an important area to explore later in the session. But fourthly and importantly, very importantly, the report does clearly convey that leadership in the area of player protection, at least by the most responsible operators, has evolved well beyond compliance box ticking. Is now much more often part of the sort of core corporate culture, and crucially defined by leadership, coming down to the board level. And so the operators have gained a lot of ground in this area and built player protection, getting the corporate ethos, and as part of their long-term sustainable business model. And then the final point is, and to add, to end on a positive a very positive note is that it's becoming increasingly clear that advances in AI technologies are now really beginning to accelerate progress towards much more effective kind of programmatic early detection capabilities, and then follow-up care that is highly personalized. Both these sort of, I guess, capabilities are increasingly moving towards being achieved cost effectively at scale. So I think it's super important that technology is enabling a significant leap forward that's going to create a lot more confidence in the relationship between operators and regulators, and help that communication in tackling the serious issues around care protection.
Yeah, thanks, Anton. That's a really good summary. And on that final point, actually, we've got a session on that later in the day, which will be fascinating. Just before we carry on, quick point of housekeeping, which I completely forgot to do at the beginning. That the report that we're talking about is tagged in the handouts on the right. For the audience, we've got three buttons at the right, three tabs at the right: chat, Q&A, and handouts. And you can open the report in the handouts. And also there at the Q&A, please do chip in with any of your questions there, and we'll attempt to answer them probably at the end. I'll try and keep an eye on that throughout the session. Anyway, so moving swiftly on. So, Simon, you at OneXBet, you're involved in the making of this report. What are your thoughts on these findings? What's your analysis?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Stephen. Anton, thank you for the kind introduction and briefing of the report. I think OneXBet obviously made a decision with recruiting me to try and change the dial of perception around OneXBet, and player protection is a key component of what we're trying to explore and develop. As with the report, nothing's perfect yet, but we're moving to get there. And as you said, Steve, we're looking to make this a global report series, starting with Western Europe, because it's perceived to be probably, the first most regulated markets in the world. And for me, I agree with the point that Anton made around consistency. But one word out of this report for me comes as confusion, because 60% of operators gave 7 out of 10 in their primary jurisdiction, rating to the regulation. But then 43% said they were unsatisfied, and 26% said they wanted more clarity. And as I mentioned to you in Lisbon when I spoke to you on this topic, Steve, math wasn't my strong point, but even those numbers are confusing. 60% give 7 out of 10, but then nearly 50% are saying unsatisfied, and 26% said they want more clarity. And I think in terms of consistency or confusion, we're seeing that UK operators in the report were fearing approaching the UK GC, and reading the article yesterday in The Guardian where someone may have been caught pushing their VIP player offshore, and I do quote, may have been caught, because obviously The Guardian didn't name who it was. That's an issue. We see Spain introducing their own algorithm, and I think that's interesting, because when Spain introduces the algorithm, who's the responsibility on player protection going to be on? Is it on the operator or the government? And I'm not a big fan of over intrusion in personal life of government, but actually does that let the operators off the hook? And I think we also see in Portugal that operators want to intervene and they can't, as per the regulation, when they identify problem gambling. And I think this all comes down to a bigger point, not necessarily between operators and regulators, but also the gaming industry or gambling industry, whatever you want to call it, itself, and its interaction with society. And by that, I mean it's actually government that set the regulation. It's the regulators that put the wording together and look at its application. I don't want to use the word enforcement at this point. And I think as an industry, we need to have a look at ourselves. There's always a but with us. There's always a way that we can find a way to do something we maybe shouldn't do. And I think that Guardian article may be an example of such behaviour. But at the same time, when you look at the European Gaming and Betting Association, who, were very pleased to see the EU vote in favour of national standardisation of, protection of gambling harm, there's a very key word at the very end of the SBC press release. It's voluntary for people to apply those standards. So I think for me, the report promoted a certain amount of confusion and actually shows that we need more clarity, consistency and communication as an industry, not just with regulators, but also with society, because ultimately regulation is only going to tighten if we don't get that balance right. And I'm not just talking about increases in tax. I'm talking about intrusion into player behavior and telling players what they can do, which can ultimately lead to them finding other forms of gambling outside of the regulated market.
Yeah, that's interesting, Simon. Because that clarity of communication, you're kind of saying is a two-way thing. Like us, the industry, communicating to the wider world, as well as regulators communicating with us, and that is something that the industry has not done very well ever. I think, Peter, is that fair to say? I mean, we're getting into the realm of politics and perception here, but perhaps that's unavoidable.
I think what Simon says is true, and I think the challenge we've got as an industry is we've always been on the edge of things because of our history and how we've grown up, and .com to .regulation to .com again to crypto. As an industry as a whole, I think we have this perception and we have to try and get away with it. What's the minimum we can do to keep our license, or minimum we can do to be okay? And that's not everyone. There are some large operators out there that are way beyond what they have to do and take this really seriously. But as an industry perception, and for a good number of operators this is true for, it's how can I do as little as possible? How can I get away with it? And when you have that perception and that reality, all that happens is you get away with it to a point, so you get caught, and you get caught for regulation, and then the government start go for you, and the national press go for you, or the church go for you, or the papers go for you as an industry. And the people that are doing the right things get swallowed up in that, by the way, because we're all the same people. And that's our history. That's always been our history as an industry. And unless we as an industry, and I think safer gambling, by the way, is a good example where we can do this, because I think, affordability and stuff, there's loads of arguments. Is it really an obligation to check the leather industry, check affordability? How can you check affordability? Is it fair to check affordability? There's many arguments there. AML, it's the definition of what AML is, and that can be all over the place. But safer gambling, it's blood of safer gambling. And you name me a VIP manager that hasn't got suspicion about which customer's okay, which customer's not okay. I started in VIP. I knew who was okay and who I suspected wasn't okay. I really did. And just that gut feel should be enough for us to behave ourselves as an industry. And if we did, I'm not sure we ever could, if we did, I think a lot of the regulation will wind away. I think a lot of the criticism will wind away. A lot of the scrutiny will wind away. There'll still be politics there. There'll still be politicians who want to get rid of gambling, use regulation to do that, or try to increase tax. That will all still be there. But I think some of this stuff, safer gambling, I don't want anyone playing with me or any other operator who shouldn't be playing or playing too much. What's the point? Why? I don't want anyone in a pub getting so drunk they fall over or get in the car and drive home. But pubs get that. All pubs get that. All drink manufacturers get that. Why don't we get it? Why don't we get it? Why do we constantly find ways to prove the customer's not got a problem rather than see it was customer problem? I think that's the lesson that you learn.
Yeah. I heard one.
Could I just ask Peter a question? Yeah. I don't want to do your job here, Steve.
Oh no,
can
please.
Peter, can I ask you a question, Peter? Because it's an interesting point you make. Because I don't believe regulation's ever going to get, let's just say, looser or weaker or maybe more effective. I think when governments get involved, it's just going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. Do you think if we, let's just say, grow up as an industry and understand, like the drinks industry do, having drink drivers, etc., is not a good look? Do you think that we will see, I don't know how to phrase it properly, do you think we will see more effective regulation? Because to me, once you go beyond the step, governments never step back, apart from the financial crash when interest rates dropped. Apart from that, they've normally been growing.
Yes, it's a good question. It depends on which regulation, right? We regulate. You gotta be clear. The regulators tend to, go to the winds, but keep to the rules and regulations desires for government. That's their job. That is their job, by the way. That's from a government policy. Government policy changes. the government policy as a whole is written by interest, including newspapers who are doing articles. It goes full circle. So every time there's, let's look at this Guardian article yesterday. Now, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know who it is. But
could you summarise the article? Because some of our viewers might not have seen it.
So it's worth having a look at it. And it was like, it's unusual for the Guardian. You don't usually see like that. But there is an allegation that the Gambling Commission in the UK identified from stuff that an operator sent that they weren't meant to send. They sent them the documents, sent some wrong documents with it. And it reads from it, it appears that this operator has been moving some of their customers, probably VIPs, to offshore. And that's not saying this, but if you read between the lines, and with, I guess, all our knowledge, I'm assuming what's happening is that if a customer can't afford it, if they're VIP and they don't have affordability, that they pass AML or those sort of things, that they're saying, well, there's this other site you can sign into, which, we have a connection to, or my friends found, or whatever it may be. Use that site and use that to fulfill all those rules and regulations. That's why it's due the article's about. Now, again, be careful because it's a rumor and a rumor and a rumor, but that's what it appears to be. I like this. We know people are doing this. We know some of the unscrupulous UK smaller operators will be doing this to maximise their profit. That type of thing is just it's Christmas come early to some of those Labour politicians in the UK who are trying to ban gambling or put fixed tax on it. Why do we keep as an industry getting these own goals? And that's not everyone. Because there is no chance in hell that a Flut or an Entain or William Hill or Sky Bets or 365 are doing that. No, on many more. There's no way in hell it's one of those. It's going to be a smaller operator who thinks they can get away with it. And those type of things are just own goals that we keep on doing to ourselves. And it's not just the UK. Look at advertising in Sweden, which is my favourite topic ever. They allowed advertising in Sweden when the regulation came in. Everyone went completely mental and the regulator stopped it. What a surprise. I remember the Spanish regulator saying in a conference once, the reason we stopped advertising in Spain is during COVID, I'm locked down. I can't even leave my house without getting an SMS from the government. And all I see on TV is advertising for gambling. There's nothing else I see. What do you think the government and regulators are going to do? And it's the same as for gambling. So I don't think going backwards, but, we are getting own goals and getting higher. We're getting more regulation. And we do that, for quarterly results to get a bit of money out of the quarter? And I'm not talking about everyone, but I'm talking there's a part of the industry that keeps doing this and own goal for everyone.
Peter, there's a point there that someone made on stage at SBC in Lisbon. I think it might have been a regulator, or anyway, it doesn't really matter who it was, but it'd be interesting if it was a regulator. He said it's the operator's job to get as close to the kind of red lines as they can in order to maximize profit. Is that the operator's job, or should there be a buffer zone there?
I think the operator's job is to be compliant. We've got over 35 licenses globally. I see what the regulator's saying though. It's his job to get as close to the red line to maximise money. But I think Peter makes a good point. You make €1 extra this quarter for what benefit for the industry in the long term. And this was interesting in the report where I mentioned earlier, the UK operator said that they didn't want to engage with the UK GC because they didn't want to look stupid. And that's a big problem if an operator doesn't want to engage. And I think that I've had a PML previously, and you're writing an email to the UK GC for clarity, and what they do is send you back the wording of the document, and then you have to go and get a clever legal opinion, and then you get a clever legal opinion that can take you close to that red line. Instead of getting clear guidance from the regulator, that doesn't happen, and then that creates a grey space for everyone to operate in. And that's a challenge, and I think, again, I'll focus on the UK here just because of my experience, but the UK needs to attract better people into the UK GC as well. A lot of these people are applying for the British Civil Service, getting fast-tracked into whichever department. Look, let's be honest, they all want to go and work in the Foreign Office, but if they don't get in the Foreign Office, they're ending up in Birmingham on not very good money. And I haven't been to Birmingham for a while, but it was never an appealing place. So where we look at talent as an industry and what kind of talent we're hiring, I think regulators also need to look at the talent they're hiring and not just send back cleverly worded legal documentation for us to go and get a legal opinion. So I understand the point of you want to get as close to the line as you can to maximize money, but I go back to Peter's point, actually, is it worth it in the long run, or should we just grow up? And we do keep, as an industry, managing to find some own goals. This old Andrew Tate thing, as a brand ambassador or something to a crypto casino, right? Yes, it's controversial, and yes, it gets some column inches, but is that what we really want as an industry? But unfortunately, I think we've seen as the industry's evolved, when this started, there was people that were in this for the betterment of the industry. I think now some people just view it as a short-term wham bam, thank you, ma'am, I'm going to make as much money as I can and two fingers up to the rest of you.
Well, and in that respect, I mean, I think 1xBet moving in this direction and espousing player protection is very much a kind of positive role model type position that you're taking. I'd
say the forefront of the engagement. No one really wants to be a role model because that just has certain connotations to it. But I think that we're all for awareness, we're all for education, and we're all for promoting treatment. In the UK white paper, there were, GamCare, etc., shut because the money's not coming. And this is another example, people, where we could have done better. When you made the donation from your profits or wherever you were taking them, we did the minimum always. So what happens is the government takes it off you and they do it themselves. Now, is the government going to be better at that? I don't know. But I think, 1xBet wants to promote awareness and education around this topic with a view to understanding globally lessons that can be learned to apply to protect, ultimately, the player, which is our end user and drives our business.
I mean, this gets to what someone said. Someone talks about the challenges of the regulator and where they're based, etc. And you can use SBC in Birmingham, but there are plenty of examples globally as well. One thing that's always frustrated me is that in almost every other regulator, you have ex people from the industry, senior people from the industry. Look at the financial services regulation in the world. It's ex-chairmen, managing directors, directors of compliances, and large financial institutions that become regulators and understand the industry. It's the same with analysts, by the way. The analysts in our industry don't understand the industry. So they've not come from it. Whereas in retail, they do. And whether it's because no one would ever want to go to the other side because the adversarial relationship is so strong, it'd be seen as almost, blasphemy to go to work for the regulator. I can think of one person who's moved from an operator to a regulator, and he's sitting in Gibraltar right now. I can't think of anyone else. There's plenty of people gone from regulator to operators, by the way, not the way around. But I would beg this industry globally and the regulators to start paying more, bringing people from the industry over. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because if that happens, what you're going to have is two things. First of all, a far better understanding of both sides. By the way, they'll catch a lot more. We all know the tricks everyone does. They shouldn't be doing. They catch a lot more. But the other side to that is they'd be educate the authorities on actually how the industry really works. Because some of the regulations come out around the world are unusable, and then everyone moans about it, but it's treated as a moan. Whereas you really would want that to be done internally, in policy and everything else. I'd like to see people at senior levels, regulators from the industry. And I'd like the industry to offer those people up. I don't think they could probably go back to industry afterwards, so maybe it's a retirement job. Maybe a very good retirement job, and I think it would do a load of good things for all regulators and all government departments and gambling around the world. That would help the industry and the regulation do better.
It's an interesting point because it happens in the finance industry, doesn't it? I mean, I know of bankers and traders that have moved to the regulators. So it's not impossible for the public authorities to pay a little bit more, I guess.
I think it comes down to this perception issue, Steve, and actually how would the industry take it? Poach you get turn gamekeeper. I think Peter makes a good point. If you went to the regulator, you're not coming back into the industry, and there's a lot of connotations we can read in between that. But I think there's a real talent issue in regulators, and that's not criticising anyone, but to have someone, a leading figure in the industry, involved in the discussion. I'm not saying they have to be involved in regulation per se, but no one's really involved in the discussion right now. And we're losing the argument led by upsetting.
But I think actually you mentioned the coach gamekeeper relationship, and we're trying to move away from that dynamic, right? And we're trying to move towards what we're talking about as a more symbiotic relationship between the regulator and the operator, a more communicative sharing relationship that leads to regulation that really works and makes sense. Because clearly, operators, especially in multiple jurisdictions, have a lot of access to data, are using the latest, are developing the latest technological tools to try and around player protection that can inform a regulator in one market what's best practice in another, or what's working and what doesn't work. And if you could have more of an open dialogue and conversation there, it would benefit everyone. Because it would be, therefore we'd get more effective regulation, potentially allow operators to be as commercial as possible within the rules that are, sensible rules. But it goes back to the point that the relationship, the industry hasn't done a great job historically, that you would both discussing, Simon and Peter, in terms of presenting itself. It's been, it's a very entrepreneurial industry filled with very entrepreneurial people wanting to make money. I don't think they want to ruin people's lives at all, but they want to make money, and therefore they want to push the envelope one way or the other. And especially at the tier 2, when you get to tier 1, and you mentioned the UK, Simon, let's use it as an example, where you've got basically an oligopoly. Those leading, podium position operators, they can afford to take a leadership role with they have to with their shareholders, but they can also take a leadership role with the regulator in terms of building a better relationship with the regulator and pulling the industry with them, because they can afford to much more so, and they have the resources to. And I know, Peter, you were at Entain and you did some of this work at Entain in this area, and look where Entain came from, GBC. I mean, we talked about what 1xBet's current, strategies are. Yeah, it's great. It's to be applauded, because when you get to a certain level of maturity, you start acting with maturity. I mean, commercial and financial maturity. You then, start really realizing how important it is to act with operational maturity, and that very much front and center includes responsible gaming and player protection.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing similar moves from the likes of Stake and even YOLO in terms of moving towards regulated markets more. Go on, Simon.
I think it's a very good point Anton makes, actually, when you're talking about tier 2, and Peter made this point as well, I'm sure that Peter's right. In this Guardian article that's mentioned, it's not going to be the big players that are doing this. But actually, with the regulation and the involvement of markets, obviously bigger companies take bigger market share. There's certain markets where we've got over 50% of the market share. But actually, then when Anton just twigged an idea, mate, if you're a tier 2 operator or even a tier 3 or trying to enter into these mature markets, how do you make your name? And I think that maybe comes back to the point you were making, Steve. You have to get as close to the regulation as you possibly can to make money. The Bet365s of this world, the 1xBets of this world, we're in a position where we can be grown up and we can engage in a conversation, and we can look to, I don't want to say lead, but, we can be at the forefront of the discussion.
Yeah.
If you're a tier 2 or a startup, when I was on the B2B side, I told people, don't worry about getting a UK license. There's no point. What are you going to do? But obviously, people are investing, as Anton's mentioned, not to ruin lives, to make money. It's a commercial business. But actually, do they make these mistakes because they're trying to enter into these markets that are mature with large-scale operators that they can't, I don't want to sound arrogant, they can't compete with it. A startup.
So you can't be in the market. I mean, the answer is, we as an industry, they shouldn't be in the market. If they can't compete correctly, don't compete. And that is reality in most industries, by the way. Yeah. It really is reality in most industries. Why is it our industry think that, you can have a bit, you have a PSP or crypto integration, you get a couple of games in there, and you can get full white label, and away you go. It doesn't work that way in any other industry in the world. Become an affiliate can do that. So, I think whilst we're talking here, this conversation about governments, regulators, and the industry getting closer together, can they work together? It starts with understanding who our who the operators are. And it starts with understanding the customers, because the customers in the end, it's all about the customer in the end. From a revenue point of view and from a safer gambling point of view, it's about the customer. We never talk about the customer, right? And it's about the customer. And the customer is going to move around whatever's easiest for them. And if there are two options, I can go to a little casino where I have to give all my details, all my IDs, have to give my bank statements, everything else, and constantly get asked questions and set limits because the albums are kicking off, versus one that leaves me alone. Which one would I go to as a customer? Now, they want to think, oh, the customer wants to be safe, but they don't. They want an easy life. They don't think they've a problem. In every time we've ever asked customers about safer gambling, every company I've worked in, they all say, straight idea, but I don't need it. That's the answer you always get. No one thinks they've got an issue or problem. So my way, if I was going to build this industry again from scratch, I would say, number one, put the regulators with much more knowledge of the industry. That's global. Have to. Number two, almost give the licenses for. It feels to me that what we're giving licenses for is a dog license. You've got a dog. Your dogs get injected. There you go. You've got a dog license. What we need to give them a more sensible license, a driving license. You are competent and capable of driving a car in a safe manner. I'm not sure licenses around the world actually cater to that. You as a person, not as a regulation, not follow regulation, but you are competent to run a business, not a safe business. Not sure we actually do that. And number three, make it really difficult for customers to go anywhere else. And that's about it. Beat the CFPs and everyone else, stopping the side of the industry is making it very easy for people to completely bypass rules. Those three things together would have a really good industry. It will never happen, but that's what should happen. Oh, number four, get a bonus, by the way. Let it be the bane of everybody's life in this industry. So,
But that's got to be the deal with authorities, is you deal with the black market and we'll be compliant. I just want to bring in a couple of comments and questions from the audience here. One here from someone in Denmark, it seems. He's saying, I'm not saying that the Danish regulation is perfect, but the Danish regulator does have an open dialogue with the industry, inviting them to annual meetings where challenges like, for example, the black market are being discussed. More regulators should look the Danish way, I think, which links to a question in here from Kirsty. Thank you, Kirsty. Is there an example of a regulator industry relationship that is believed to be better example for people to try and achieve? So obviously we've got one example there, Denmark. Does anyone know any others? I mean, my feeling is in the UK that the regulator operator relationship has improved over recent years, despite some of the headlines. Peter, you're nodding your head.
I think Andrew Rhodes actually has done a phenomenal job. I really do. I think he's smart. I think he gets it. I think he has had a really tough time with his governance, by the way, because one thing, I'll talk about Denmark in a minute, but Danish regulator actually is a really good regulator, but their government's messing them up and creating political turmoil, which creates the problems. Denmark used to be brilliant. It's not a brilliant market anymore. The taxation's gone up. The rules have got strict to a level that it's difficult to make money in some cases. And that's not the regulator, that's the government that's done that to the regulator, to the industry. We always used to talk about Denmark being the very best regulator. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. But I think Andrew Rhodes did a really good job. He's struggling with his government, be it the Conservative government before the Labour government now. And let's see what happens in the budget this week. But, they haven't actually implemented fully the white paper yet. And that's probably being held up by government lobbying, by some of the MPs lobbying quite hard to be much stricter. I think, if I'm going to be honest, he's also held up by the quality of some of his people. To be really honest, I can say that now that I don't touch the UK. I haven't got PML anymore. When Andrew was in the room, there's some really, really great conversations. I'll stop there. Really great conversations.
Yeah.
To name a regulator that's good, unfortunately, my answer right now, the best regulators are the sort of more .com ones, the more sort of Gibraltar's, Those are some of the best ones because they have to be, because it's their business model. They have to be. And I don't think they let you get away with it, by the way. That's not letting the operators get away with it. They just get the industry more. But I remember very well when I first joined William Hill as COO, I moved to Gibraltar, and about a week later, the regulator came to my door in Gibraltar. He had to live in Gibraltar, and came to my door and came in and said, sat down on my sofa and said, look, we've got you're regulated. You're a big company. We've got a limit to the number of rules and clear regulation we've got here. Number one regulation is do not get me in the Daily Mail. If you get me in there, believe me, you're form fighting. Yeah. And I have to tell you, he probably shouldn't have said that, but I have to tell you, probably the best way of making us self-controlled of everything in my entire life. Way stronger than any UK regulation ever did. Because you knew that if you did something stupid, you know what's going to happen. And he came to my house on purpose. I know where you live. I will take you down personally. And that's an interesting...
Is that good regulation, Peter? Because it seemed to work. Is that good regulation?
Regulating, right? And you can do that. Then you've got a few car, a few licenses, right? But the sentiment there was clever. Behave yourselves, self-control yourselves. You've got a licensing license, but rethink your self-controls. But in the UK, how many licenses are now? 800 and something gaming licenses, something like that? B2C? I can't remember the exact number. Probably about 3,000 in total licenses, 4,000 licenses. You can't do that. You just can't do that. Malta can't do that, but 1,000 licenses. So you've got lots of licenses you have to put rules on. And then the rules either get abused because they're not good enough, or just curtail competition, or curtail people operating. Or you find ways around it. That's what's going on.
Yeah. I think I agree with what Peter said. The Danish regulator used to be the standard, but now I think Peter makes a good point. It's politics that changed the world, as it always does, and I think that's where I mentioned the point about perception, because we're living in a political, volatile environment. Let's just put it that way for point of ease. And politics is always going to change, and the politics drives the regulation for the regulators to apply. So we do really need to grow up, behave ourselves, and engage better as an industry to try and change that perception, because perception is everything. How we do that, I think conversations like this, initiatives around player protection, and Peter made a very good point, is also about putting the player at the heart of what we do, because we've talked a lot about operators and regulation, but a limited amount on player, and as my teacher used to say to me, the clue's in the men. Player protection report. And I think that's why I think Spain's also going to be interesting, because the regulator's taken the control of the algorithm. So politics is now taken control of the regulation in Spain around player protection.
Well, I think the backdrop to this is, you think about the increasing focus on sort of mental health and well-being generally in this current, say, generation or last couple of generations, and the increasing cost of living crisis, right? And this is always player protection is really seen about protecting the vulnerable, those that potentially don't have control of their whatever it. We're talking about gambling now, so their gambling habits, or really can't afford to participate as much as they do, and against that sort of mental health and cost of living crisis, that kind of backdrop, and they're bigger issues that we can't really cover on this session, but they do feed into the politics that are driving the regulation around player protection, and whether it's going fully in the right direction or making the steps.
Surely, when we're talking about public perception, the role of our industry bodies have got a part to play here. I mean, in the UK at the moment, the Betting and Gambling Council is seems to be everywhere moaning about taxes going up. I feel like I only hear from it, and I'm not just talking about the BGC here, but generally our industry associations. I feel like I almost only hear from them when they're saying no. Is that fair? Is there
I'm getting to Quentin Bonnier and the EQPA and a few others in this one. I think they do say stuff, but no one makes it up. I think really stuff's picked up, no matter how much they push. is the money running. There's a serious tax issue going on because, Gordon Brown took completely distorted stats and used them. Exactly what the Gambling Commission, by the way, said, that there'll be criminal cases if people do it. Where's Gordon Brown? What's he in prison, by the way? Anyway, they're taking distorted stuff, and that gets everyone going. And, let's be honest, in politics and many things, you take distorted information and then you build a case. It's good for you as a politician. I actually think this is about politicians. I think this is about politicians going to politics because it tends to be campaigners, particularly on the more socialist left-hand side. It tend to be campaigners. And campaigning against gambling is a very good campaign thing to do. You meet one person in your constituency or in your circle that had a problem gambling, and you will take this to heart. If you meet one person that had a problem drinking, you'll ignore it. So there is a perception out there, unfortunately, that gambling is bad by many politicians. And I think that's the bit we have to try and find a way of containing. Most people who play bingo, play lottery, do sports betting, would not consider themselves gamblers. If they don't consider themselves gamblers, when they read about problem gambling, it doesn't count for me. And that's why they have a lot of constituency. 50% of the UK gamble, 60% of France gamble, things like that. There should be a very good constituency for our industry. There isn't, because they don't perceive themselves to be gamblers. They have a quick glutter. So I think you're right, there are bigger issues there, but this is around politicians, around newspaper articles. How do you, and it sounds awful, but how do you defend against suicide? I remember interviewing someone once, by the way. It was really interesting. We interviewed someone who came from the drink industry for a CMO role that day. And he was sitting in the interview and he said, I don't get it. When someone goes to a pub, drinks a lot, gets in the car, drives, kills someone on the road, you blame the driver. In gambling, it's the gambling company's fault for doing almost exactly the same. Why? That's what you've got to fix.
Yeah,
I'm not sure the government's interested in doing that in any country.
Well, I'm not sure the gambling industry is ready to talk about suicide. I mean, I've tried to put it on panels several times because I think if you're not willing to talk about suicide, you're not taking player protection seriously. It's the sharp end, right? Anyway, right, moving on. We're coming sort of towards the end of our session. I'll just encourage the audience, if you have any more questions, please put them in the Q&A box on the right, and I will attempt to get them answered. Simon, we're going to move around the world with this International Player Protection Player Safety Index. Next stop is Africa.
Well, I think go on. Yeah, I was just going to say that's a report that's in process at the moment. Obviously, we're not involved in the actual report writing or the research to keep it fully independent. So that's on SBC at the moment. They're talking with regulators and operators in Africa. And this is going to be the second in a full report series. So after Africa, we go to LATAM. And the final one is to be confirmed, to be decided. And actually, I think we want to hear from the industry and understand where they want to look as well. But just picking up on the previous point about engagement, I think when we're talking about the GBC and when we heard about it, etc., I think we're only heard when we are complaining, when we're actually trying to engage. And Helen Walton's been making some interesting points on LinkedIn about some Bristol University research, which, I'll be honest, was clearly flawed. But we're only heard when we're trying to make points that are perceived as negative. And I think that is a challenge, and it comes down to that perception point of gambling is just bad.
Yeah. Peter, you had a couple of thoughts on in our prep call about regulators in Africa. I think you were quite positive about.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people from Western Europe think Africa, how it must be a weak black market or dodgy or not really licensed or .com, and that's absolutely the opposite of the truth. It is quietly regulated. A number, particularly East Africa and Southern Africa, have regulated quietly without anyone realizing, with some really good local and a few international brands in there, and has some really strong, good regulation. Now, is it as strong in things like affordability or in safer gambling? No, not yet. Not yet. But certainly within the money laundering side, certainly within the fair gaming side, certainly within the advertising rules and regulations, and also in the money side. One of the things that Africa's going through, and most of Africa outside South Africa are going through it, is these mobile money. They're not using banking or credit cards or stuff like that. They're using mobile money. So the KYC and everything else is done by the mobile phone company. They don't use mobile money in and out. It's a perfectly normal way of paying. It's not small amounts. It's you pay almost all your banking is done by mobile money via the mobile phone company. And actually, they've used that and they're regulating that and they're regulating gambling. And there are some good regulators out there. I was going to say Zambia has put massive tax on, so maybe that's not a good example. Because, of course, the other thing they keep on doing is trying to pay tax all the time, Kenya, Zambia, etc. But there were some decent regulations in that market, and I think that's a market that is doing interesting ways. It's a bit like me, how they got connected. They bypassed 3G completely and went straight from almost no phones straight to 5G. I think they got the same thing with gambling. They will have some good regulation in there, as long as the politicians stop doing stupid taxation, and that's the one watch out for that. It's a silly taxation. It keeps on changing. Yeah. And there's some taxation to make it almost impossible to actually be legitimate in some countries.
Yeah.
But that's very much politics versus technology, right? I mean, what makes that African, regulatory regime work better is the technology that underpins it around payments, as you said. And I think it goes back to the point that's made in the report around the developments that AI will bring in this specific area of player protection across all jurisdictions. And technology, I think, is very much the answer here, because it allows you to, provide detailed, personalized player protection and sort of earlier detection at scale when it works properly. There's every reason to think it can work properly with the advances that we're seeing in all industries. And so, I think that's the positive here for all jurisdictions around this topic, and maybe that's why Spain are deciding to centralize player protection, because they feel that if they make it ubiquitous and they determine what is a problem gambler and how to detect them, then the state's more in control rather than just leaving it to operators. I don't know if it's the right way to do it. With Spain, some socialist government they have, it's the path that they're choosing. But I think technology is the answer.
If it really happens, there'll be an election soon there. Let's see what actually happens, I think. But you're right.
The point on technology is key, Anton, and it's a good one to make. But actually, again, this is where the industry needs to also learn, because everyone's talking about AI now. The last couple of trade shows, I'm going to be pretty neutral on the ones I've attended, is that you just put powered by AI in your stand. It's like, oh, I'm powered by AI. Most of the people don't even know what AI is. So I think as an industry, we also need to grow up and understand that AI can be a very good tool, and it's a tool we can use very effectively. But we need to understand the tool and how to apply it. And I think Peter made a very good point earlier about KYC. It's not just about KYC in gaming. Everyone wants an easier life. I mean, I live here in Armenia. The amount of pieces of papers that are stamped just for the sake of stamping a piece of paper. If you can automate it and keep a player safe and make their player journey easier, we're all for it. And, that's what we should be looking to do, rather than just looking at a headline of powered by AI. What does that actually mean? And I think how we apply these technological tools is interesting. And coming back to Africa, I think we're going to have a lot to learn from Africa and this mobile payment that Peter mentioned. And I think that's the challenge for us as an industry based in Western Europe, is to not view the industry through our optic of, oh, yes, we're bigger, we're better, we're more regulated. Actually, what can we learn from others? And I think I'd really seen that in one expert when I've been engaging with people. People have an optic or a perception of the company, and that can be based on many things, but it's normally based on a bit of a colonial Western European view, if I'm honest. And I think that's what we have to change as an industry. We are not best because we were born in Western Europe, and we are not best because we have the most perceived developed regulation.
Yeah.
That's where we also need to challenge the optic. And I know we're short on time, so that's the end of my Chilean one.
Yes, thanks. So I do have one more question. I'm going to point it at you, Peter, because I think you might have been involved in some of this. But so this is from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. She asks, do you think self-regulatory initiatives in player protection have resulted in better or more moderate outcomes from regulators and governments, especially in the UK?
Yes, 100%. And I will use 3 examples. I'll use Entain's Arc, because I cannot with it, and we spent a lot of time over and above what we had to do by regulation in way. But I'll use Flutter, who does something similar in the UK and globally, and 365 as well, who does something similar globally. And actually, by showing the Gambling Commission, both collectively and also individually, that look at what we found, look at what we saw, and look at what we're doing, I think it opened up their eyes to what could be done. Now, the problem with this stuff, let's use the word AI, the problem with AI or machine learning or algorithms is you're not going to catch everyone. And hindsight's easy. So when the regulator comes and looks at a case in why spot it there, well, the algorithm didn't do it. They said we shouldn't use an algorithm. And I think by doing this stuff and going over and above what's needed, you start to show a regulator how it works. And you can't catch every single person. That's reality. You're not going to catch every single person. MI5 don't catch every single terrorist. The police don't catch every single murderer. You can't catch every single person. But I think it does show regulators what you can do. And if we're only going to the red line and there, no one would have done that. And actually would have probably had much stricter regulation in safer gambling as opposed to anything else in the UK. I think that did work. I think it was the right thing to do, by the way. Forget if it worked or not. It was the right thing to do. We found a lot more customers that we hadn't found before under the regulatory framework, that we perceived as being problem gamblers or potential problem gamblers, that we could then take action and deal with, particularly ones that were getting there, weren't there yet. So it's just the right thing to do as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think of I feel like there's a lot of cynicism around self-regulatory improvements as well. You know, I think of the whistle-to-whistle ban or the shirt sponsorship ban or things like that. The right thing to do.
Can I give you another one?
Yeah.
There was a decision by the industry in the UK in the first 5 or 6 days of COVID lockdown to stop TV advertising. It was not a request from government. In fact, there were certain TV companies screaming, pleading to the government, don't let them do it, don't let them do it. They were just going because they were panicking about advertising. And there was a decision made, and I remember sitting on the calls with the large 5 operations, BGC, etc., discussing what to do. And it was unanimous by all of us to not have advertising. In fact, because we still had it and because the TV company worried we'd gotten responsible gaming advertising only. And then compare that to Spain, where they basically lost all advertising, is what happened in COVID. That's a phenomenal example, by the way, of doing the right thing and then at the end getting rid of the result. But there's no banned advertising in the UK. What's another example? So you can do the right thing, and it stops the worst excesses of regulators or politicians who react to us being thugs.
Yeah.
That's how they react to it, just being thugs.
Yeah. I mean, advertising's it's our public face in many ways. And yeah. Chaps, I thank you very much. I'm going to bring this call to a close. I think that's been a fascinating conversation. Perhaps we could, Simon, remind us, what are your 3 C's? It is 3 C's, isn't it? I feel like there might even be 4 C's.
Well, it's 4 because it's confusion.
Yeah.
But from that confusion, we need more clarity, consistency, and communication.
Right, and that goes both ways from...
Yeah, I mean, it's not a one-way traffic, and I think when we're talking about this self-regulation, it's very interesting because we do a lot of good work, but we can't just expect a pat on the back for doing the right thing. I sometimes think, oh yeah, we've done something really good, we should be praised. Well, we've done what we should have done, you know. And I think that's where we also need to grow up a little bit.
Well, and we can also communicate these good things that we do. So thank you very much, Anton. That was great. Peter, thank you. Simon, thank you. Thank you, 1x, for your sponsor. And thank you very much to the audience. You were engaged and interested, which makes my job all that much easier. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks. Bye.